very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for the change in my speaking slot. We have a royal visit in Manchester today, so that's where I'm heading next. But I've somewhat put myself in the difficult slot of the afternoon, haven't I, just before the coffee break. It won't exactly be Corbyn at Glastonbury, but I will do my best to keep you all awake for the next 15 minutes or so. Obviously, the visit that I'm about to go to relates to the fact that the city of Manchester, Greater Manchester more broadly, has been through its darkest times in the last month. But I think you can see in the way the place has pulled together the values of the people that there is something incredibly resilient and strong in our communities, and that will be the spirit that defines the new north as we build forward from here, because I do feel we're at a moment of real change in our country, and it's the reason why I decided to leave Westminster. I think devolution and all of its potential will bring more social change for the better in the coming period than we will get if we wait for the old Westminster system to do its thing. But I do think the more we invest in it together, the stronger it will be. And that's one of the main messages that I will want to get over this afternoon. And actually, I wanted to start with an admission, which is actually quite a dangerous admission in front of a Northern Transport Summit. But it's this. As Chief Secretary to the Treasury in 2007, I was the person who put the funding package together for Crossrail One. Yes, billions of pounds spent on London. But the reason I start with that admission is because the experience of doing that told me everything that is wrong with the way we fund transport in our country. I was given the task by the then Chancellor of the Exchequer of setting a really tough funding challenge to the business community in London, and that was that Crossrail should be funded a third from London council taxpayers, a third from London businesses, and then, if that could be achieved, the Treasury would come in and add its third. Now, the question you've got to ask yourself is, how many other parts of the country could fund a project on that scale, on that basis? They probably couldn't, is the answer. But it was worse than that. Conscious that I was funding a major project in London, I asked Treasury officials at that spending review, it was the 2007 spending review, to bring forward some projects in the regions that I could fund alongside it, because I didn't want to just fund projects in London. And when I waited for those projects to come forward, I began to understand what was the problem. And the problem is the way we assess transport investment in this country. It is inherently biased towards areas of greater economic activity, because it asks the projects that are asking to be funded to demonstrate added value to the economy in terms of GVA. And obviously, the more affluent parts of the country are better able to make that business case and to get over the hurdle. I've got here actually the transport business case, which is still used by the Department for Transport and the Treasury. It sets 5 cases that must be met before major transport projects are funded. A strategic case, economic case, commercial case, financial case, management case. The question I've got is, where's the social case? Where's the question about fairness in terms of the distribution of resources across the country? Well, it's not there. And I think that begins to explain why, over decades, we have seen a failure to invest in the transport infrastructure of the north of England. It explains, in my view, why we have an inherently London-centric approach to resource allocation. Because if that's the test that's being set, it's not surprising that some parts of the country find it more difficult to meet than others. And that's what we've got to change if we're serious about changing transport investment in the north. If we are serious too about rebalancing the country and rebalancing the economy, then I think we've also got to get serious about rebalancing spending on transport. Last year, 2015-16, For every resident of the northwest of England, the government spent £401 on transport. In the same year, it spent £973 per person in Greater London. Double, more than double. And I think that really illustrates the problem. Looking ahead, according to research done by the Institute for Public Policy Research, if we look to committed capital expenditure going forward, the figure I just gave was revenue and capital, looking to committed capital expenditure, in the next few years, the IPPR estimate that for every £1 spent on transport in the north, London will get 6. And that's according to schemes committed to. So this imbalance is not just not going away, it's actually getting worse. And we've got to do something about it, because I would argue that poor transport is the single biggest barrier to the northern economy. It's the biggest threat to our future prosperity. It is responsible in a large part for the productivity gap between the northwest and the south of England. But I don't believe it's our fault, because governments of both colours over decades have failed to put the investment in. And it is now showing our rail services are slow. They're outdated in terms of the quality of the travelling experience, and for that they are very expensive. And as a result of that, the motorways of the north of England are full, because rail isn't competitive enough to tempt enough people out of their cars. This system is basically at saturation point. And if you travel anywhere in the north of England, I think now you see increasing congestion, and that congestion is a threat to the northern economy. It cannot be right that it takes longer to get by train from Manchester to Newcastle than it does to go from London to Paris. And yet here in 2017, that is the reality. And it's something we've got to change. I believe that the change principally has got to come with respect to Northern Powerhouse Rail, or HS3. That is the scheme that is potentially the game changer when it comes to future investment. And I just want to say something about that today. If you were to ask people here, people in Greater Manchester, what is the single highest investment priority for our country, they would probably say, in my view, west to east transport investment across the north of England, linking the great cities. They would say that that was a higher priority than HS2. And yet, if you look at the commitment to Northern Powerhouse Rail on the part of the government, I think, without making a political point, you would probably say it's half-hearted at best. It still feels quite a vague commitment. And yet, obviously, the commitment to HS2 is very real. If the government wants to build public support for HS2, in my view, it should give much more clarity about Northern Powerhouse Rail, because then it would start to make sense to the public here that if you are integrating better east-west links across the north with HS2, I think people would begin to see the case for HS2. And we have got to now make that case, it seems to me. Helpfully, Andrew Adonis, Lord Adonis, has today issued a statement as chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, saying that he believes the government should set out a single integrated proposal for what he still calls HS3, or others in the room might now call Northern Powerhouse Rail, by the end of the year, with government approval. Now, that feels to me like a step forward, but it's essential that we echo it. And this brings me to one of the main points I wanted to make today. We have got to get better as a north of England in making our case on the national stage for investment in our transport infrastructure. And what I mean by that is not just the politicians of the north lining up together, the three metro mayors that we now have, but also obviously leaders of our councils. We need to stand side by side with business from across the north of England in making a single case to the government. challenging those assumptions that the Treasury use about how projects should be funded. We should be saying that, quite frankly, it would be a national scandal if the government were to prioritise funding Crossrail 2 over Northern Powerhouse Rail. But that is a real threat as we sit here today. So one of the things that we've got to do is to get better at making that case. Of course, we've got Transport for the North, and that was an important step forward. But I don't think yet we are making our voice heard in the way that we should, particularly running into those budgets or autumn statements. And it's possible that we will be having one later in the year. Well, we will have a budget statement. We should be agreeing today how we are going to make that case, to pick up the Adonis suggestion today that we want a signed-off proposal from the government. And I think we should go further. We should be saying now, to put confidence behind Northern Powerhouse Rail, that the government should be increasingly bringing HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail together. They should be planned, designed and delivered, in my view, as a single integrated scheme. Because at the moment, it feels to me like HS2 is gathering all the talent when it comes to the consultants and the engineers, and yet Transport for the North isn't getting that same backing in terms of getting the experts to help design a scheme. I think it will make more sense if effectively we start to think of these two as one scheme. It wouldn't make sense, would it, to build HS2 and then to send everybody home again, only to bring them back a few years later to build the west to east links. And in fact, if that's the way we do proceed, I think people will be very cynical about whether Northern Powerhouse Rail will ever happen. The government really has to take that away, because the positive is this: though our transport today isn't good enough, if the government were to do that and say, look, there's going to be one integrated scheme here for both, that we are going to manage as one, it would put such a shot in the arm. It would bring back to life the concept called the Northern Powerhouse like that. At the moment, it feels like it's a little on the way out. If they were to make that commitment, then it would have huge power and would bring investment opportunities that we could use immediately. So that's the case that we've got to make together, and I believe we should make that together, running into the autumn statement. Beyond that, though, of course, as Mayor of Greater Manchester, I want to make more urgent progress. I believe the government could help us in other ways. We've put a bid in to the government for devolution of rail stations in Greater Manchester, the 97 rail stations here, many of them around 100 years old, and many of them look like they haven't seen much investment in the 10 decades since. About a third of those stations are not wheelchair accessible. That's not good enough in this day and age. This is an area where devolution could drive real change. If we had more control over those stations at a local level, I think we would do a better job of running them both as stations, but also linking them to town centre regeneration. The property potential of those places, building more flats above them, around them, making sure that we're building homes that are linked to our public transport system. There is a compelling case, it seems to me, for rail station devolution, because it stands to reason that we are better placed here, closer to those stations and those communities, to know how they can best be exploited than people sitting in Network Rail or at national level with oversight of them. There are other things too. I think we've got to get more serious about congestion. You know, if I look around Greater Manchester today, I would say it's becoming one of the biggest barriers to our potential success going forward. We've got to do more to persuade people out of their car and onto public transport, or indeed onto their bike. We must change the way we provide bus services here in the city region. We have the Act of Parliament now, the Bus Services Act, and we will be using the potential that brings to drive real change in bus services. It creates the potential for us to have an Oyster card across Greater Manchester. Again, the public here have waited too long for these developments, and we will now get on with making sure that we bring them through. We need to look at other innovative ideas in terms of congestion and reducing it. For instance, allowing car sharing in bus lanes is an idea that I think we should look at seriously. But here's the point where I will finish. We've got to get much more serious about modal shift, and not just about tackling pinch points, but also about getting people out of their cars. And if I look around the north, I don't see enough ambition on cycling and active travel. And that's something that's got to change here. I speak to you in the week that Manchester will get its first bike hire scheme. It's arriving within days. For those of you who live here, maybe that's a good thing or possibly a bad thing if you're going to see bikes all over the place all of a sudden, but it's coming and it starts very soon. I want to appoint a cycling commissioner in the next few weeks to drive change, because I also think that increasingly younger people will look for the highest quality cycling infrastructure when they are looking at places to live, and the cities that can offer that kind of infrastructure will be the ones that, in my view, start to sell themselves better on a national and an international stage. So I've got the highest possible ambitions for what we might achieve. What I am asking for today is really your support to make this case from the north to government as one. This is our moment to do it. We've waited long enough here for levels of transport investment that other people in other parts of the country take for granted. If London had Greater Manchester's transport system, there would be protests on the streets because they wouldn't put up with it. Well, nor should people here. I want to see here a public transport system that is at least as good, if not better, than London, so that we are then in a position to put Greater Manchester forward as we want it to be, as a place that is going places and is going to be, as it was in the past, but will be in the future, a centre for industry and innovation, the place where people want to come to live. So thank you very much indeed for listening. Time I've got, I'll be more than happy to take some questions.
I'll join you on here. You start with the poll. Thank you very much, Andy. I couldn't chair a conference with so many planners in the room without asking you about the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which you've committed to rewriting extensively, or words to those effect. Any update on how long that will take and what your initial view is of having looked at the framework since election?
Well, we are on with a rewrite. That, of course, would have happened anyway on the back of the consultation, but I've set out very clearly what I want to see. In my view, the plan that we had wouldn't have delivered a Greater Manchester where people want to live, to pick up that last point I was making in my speech. The logic of that plan would have been decaying town centres surrounded by urban sprawl, more and more cars on our roads. We can do better than that. So I want to rebalance the plan towards town centres and brownfield. For those of you who immediately think, oh, well, that gets more difficult, I say today, I am absolutely ready to use the mayoral powers at my disposal, particularly in respect of compulsory purchase, to make schemes possible, viable, so that we do this in partnership. But I believe very strongly that we need to start thinking about development differently, not just going for the easy places to develop, but transforming those outlying towns of Greater Manchester, building higher density housing linked to the public transport system with better quality cycling infrastructure, for instance. And I want the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework to reflect that shift. I won't shy away from difficult decisions because I still accept the ambition in terms of home building, but I want them to be the right type of homes in the right places. And the last draft, I'm afraid, didn't do that for me. I also wanted to bring forward the right kind of industry for a 21st century Greater Manchester, not just warehousing and distribution. Okay, there'll be a call for some of that, and we were hearing about the post-Panamax facility at Liverpool and what that might do in terms of transport opportunities. But let's also aim higher in terms of 21st century industry. So I want, if we can get it right, the spatial framework could become a real positive for Greater Manchester when we go out to sell it. But it does have to be right, and it has to take the public with us. And that's why we're now in that process of redrafting and rebalancing it.
Are we talking another 2 or 3 years of going back to the beginning?
No, we're not talking about that. I want to crack on with it. You know, we would want to, later this year, to be looking maybe at another iteration. I'm not doing this to push it into the long grass. I want everyone to understand that. I want this to be the right plan that's right for us in terms of setting out a vision for the future of Greater Manchester that the people here can get behind. So, you know, yes, it might take a little more time. It's not about putting it off indefinitely, but it is about getting it right, because if we do get it right, it will have much more force as a document.
Okay. Anybody in the audience? Yeah, one question here, then one back there, and then we'll wrap up after that. Yeah.
Thanks. Very good. Very stimulating. Thank you. My name's Neil Anderson from Amy. You'll appreciate that we're currently involved in the Transpennine upgrade project. I really seek some advice from you, really, as to whether we should be presenting that and developing it much more as an enabler for the longer-term HS3, rather than just seeing it as a way of fixing some of the short-term problems that exist on that network at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I think we must. And I think there's currently still a bit of confusion, isn't there, about electrification between Manchester and Leeds, about whether that is HS3 or is that not HS3. I think we've got to clear this out, actually, and get, as I said before in my speech, get our act together when it comes to making the case to government. What are we asking for, and when are we asking for it? And I don't think we've managed quite to do that yet. And I think the time is getting crucial, because if Crossrail 2 is moving down the track, as I hear it is there really going to be enough money around to fund Northern Powerhouse Rail as well? I would say that's a very debatable point. So we've got to get moving. Andrew Adonis has said today it wants the government to sign off a single plan later this year for phase 1 of HS3 Northern Powerhouse Rail. We've got to take that as an invitation for us to start saying, well, this is what we want as the north of England when it comes to that. And I personally think we've got to start making that, yes, make that economic case, but make that social case as well. But my view would be link it much more to HS2 and piggyback Northern Powerhouse Rail using HS2 infrastructure. Personally, I think that's where we should go when we're making the case. We can't be going to government asking to have 2 schemes funded, electrification, and then going back for HS3. I think we have to go with one ask, and I think the quicker we do that, the better.
Okay, question here, yeah.
Thank you. Paul Boyfield, Lexington Communications. You mentioned Crossrail 2 and the potential competing demands. Looking at the national political picture that we now have, Mr Corbyn riding high in the polls, 46% yesterday. I can't believe I just said that out loud. 46%, promising more money for everything. We're going to see the government, to try and fend him off, divert billions of pounds into triple lock, university tuition, all sorts of things, very useful things, no doubt, but they're going to have to find billions for them. We're going to have to fight 10 times harder to secure this capex, aren't we, in this very difficult, competitive political climate?
I agree. I think the election does change things in terms of where the government would have been in terms of its spending priorities. I think it's under more pressure, but I think it's also under more pressure to listen to the North, because obviously things didn't go in the way that they wanted, and I do think that whole question of fairness across the country is rising up the agenda, particularly if they do a deal with the DUP and it puts a couple of £1 billion into Northern Ireland. You can be certain I'll be trying to get on the Today programme tomorrow morning if they do that, saying...
They've done it.
Oh, well, they've done it, right. OK, well, the Barnett formula, I think, currently favours the other nations, and then you get deals like this thrown on top. What about the north of England would be my call. And we've got to get better at getting that voice heard. There is that autumn statement later this year is crucial, absolutely crucial. I make you a commitment here today. I will get the political leaders of the north of England in one room if you get the business leaders there as well, because that's what we've got to do. We've got to agree a plan and get behind it and make the argument. That's what London did do with Crossrail 1. They did. They lobbied for it very, very effectively. And yet, I don't think yet the North is quite pulling together. And it's frustrating to me that the North East didn't go for a mayoral devolution deal, and West Yorkshire the same. I wish they had, because it would have put kind of power, strength to our elbow. But doesn't matter. We can still work with the leaders there. But we must start to say now that we've got to be at the front of the queue when it comes to transport investment, and as I say, get that voice heard on the national stage in a challenging political climate for sure.
And whilst you've understandably been concentrated on your manifesto pledges and lots of actions around homelessness and other areas since, are you also starting now to move to that lobbying sort of position of spending time knocking on the doors at Whitehall and Westminster and doing that sort of lobbying work that you're talking about as well?
Yeah, just a couple of things to say on that. Obviously, the general election kind of closed down that side of it. Just obviously when I got elected, there was not really a government to talk to. Then events of the last month in Greater Manchester obviously taken precedence rightly. But now with the government having signed its deal by the sounds of things, the time is coming to get on the front foot. I've written to the Prime Minister today, setting out various demands from Greater Manchester, but transport is absolutely prominent in that list. I'll be down there on Wednesday with the Chief Constable talking about police funding. But I do want to assure you all that every minister I speak to, and the minister who spoke this morning came to see me afterwards, and we had a good chat about all of these things. So I am very directly making the case. And for those in the room from Greater Manchester, I just wanted to say something particularly. I know at the mayoral election people probably voted for me across party political boundaries given the nature of the result I received. What I would say to people is, from my point of view, the point scoring is left where it belongs, which is Westminster. From my point of view, I'm not coming into this job to play party politics of any kind whatsoever. What appeals to me about it is the ability to make a difference, to form new alliances, particularly with business, to get our voice heard and get the voice of the North heard more loudly. And if the government do the right thing, I will say so. I'm going to have a very clear lobbying approach with them. If they do the right thing by the North, I will say so and I will applaud them for it. If they don't, I will call them out. But I do think getting this approach right now, this moment is crucial, isn't it? These 6 months now, as this government tries to govern with the majority or lack of it that it's got, it's going to be making decisions that will determine the next decade probably. And we have got to get better at getting in there and getting our voice heard. I give you my commitment that I will do whatever I can using my knowledge of Westminster to get on that front foot and make sure we do.
Fantastic. We look forward to reporting on it in the coming months. But thank you very much for your time.
Cheers.
And good luck with the royal visit. Yeah, take this stuff.